1d8. 9. This is a 1d10. That is my bad. Whoops. Welcome, everyone. I'm Mara, and today we're in a bit of a different setup. We're at my desk because I am presenting to you all my TBR game. So I like to play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm obsessed with it. I play it as often as I can with my friends online and with my husband in real life. And so when I was like designing a character for one of my games, and it came to me like, what if I could design my character, but then depending on what I got, I could pick books based on this character that I've made. And the books that I read for that month for my TBR would make up a Dungeons and Dragons character. So each month I'd kind of like make a new one, and that will be the theme for the month. So I figured out how I would make it work, and I decided to have 4 elements. If you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, you know there's a lot more than 4 elements, but basically when you make a character you have to decide on its stats, so like how healthy it is, how much like strength it has, or intelligence, wisdom. These are the kind of the statistics. You also decide on your class, your alignment, and your race and your appearance. And this is because Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing tabletop game which uses pen and paper. So you pretend to be your character while you're playing, and like have to put yourself in their shoes and try and think of what kind of decisions they would make. And also some of them might be motivated by, what class your character is or what race it is, because in this world, there's a lot of lore about how all the races interact and how all the classes behave and all of that sort of stuff. So I have distilled it down to these 4 elements because I wanted to, like, when I have my TBR, I want to be able to imagine a character in my head, and that will be, for example, February's D&D character. And what I need to be able to imagine it, like if I were talented and if I were an artist, if I wanted to imagine this character, I would need to know, first of all, its race, to know its appearance, its class, its gender, and its alignment. So I'm going to start with explaining class because I feel like that's one of the integral bits about D&D. So I'm putting the graphic up here, and class is, or up here, I don't know. So in Dungeons and Dragons, you have 12 base classes. There's like more that have come out with like expansions and such, but these classes determine the sort of spells you know and the sort of fighting style you have. So for example, a monk will use mostly hand-to-hand combat with some magic as well, whereas a fighter just uses swords, axes, shields. They're like your typical knight or gladiator that you would think of that doesn't have much magic and mostly uses weapons. And then there's characters such as a wizard, which is a classic, very lightweight, but knows a lot of spells. So, can't hold his own in a weapons battle, but he can hold his own in a magical battle for sure. And so you can see that I've paired classes with some genres. And I'll go into why I paired them. I'm just going to go to the overview now, and in case people like don't really care why I chose certain things and just want to get to the actual TBR game, they can skip. And next I chose alignment. So this is the alignment table which I have come up with. So in D&D there's actually more than these alignments. There is alignments like chaotic, neutral or lawful good. Like you can combine some of them, but I decided for the sake of simplicity and because I don't know, I don't think I could come up with enough traits to cover all of the alignments. I have just taken out the individual words and put them by themselves. So alignment means the morals of your character. So for example, you might have a character who is a paladin who is very strict about his creed and his religion. So that might be a very lawful person, someone who is very adheres very much so to a set of rules, and that's how they guide their morals. That would be an example of a character alignment. And then the more odd one is unaligned, and unaligned basically means animals or certain creatures that aren't, natural animals, because it's thought that, for example, like we think that you wouldn't judge a dog for, I don't know, if it attacked something, because it's just acting on instinct. It's not acting on, its set of ingrained morals, which is something we tend to think sentient beings have, like humans. So that's why unaligned exists. It kind of encompasses everything that doesn't have the intellectual or sentient capacity to have an alignment, and just kind of acts on instinct. Next, we have race. So there are 8 race. Well, there's actually 9, but I got rid of one because I felt it was too redundant. I chose these 8 Dungeons and Dragons races. And races in Dungeons and Dragons are more like, they call them races, but I think they're more like species. And you have some of your traditional fantasy Tolkien-esque races like humans, dwarves, and elves, as well as halflings, which are kind of like hobbits. And I've kind of used these to devise myself some challenges. So with these 3 categories I have so far, I can decide genre, I can decide something that the book has to have as like a major plot point or something, or the traits, and I have a challenge for the month as well. And lastly, I decided to include gender. So the reason I decided to include it is because as I was trying to think of like a character, like if I were to imagine this TBR character I am making, like I would want to know like, oh, like does it present female? Does it present male? Like, is it non-binary? Because I think that's a very important aspect of someone's character. So I am a cis female. So I have very little concept of what it's like to not to be in the in some of the genders that don't conform to the norm. So this is what I came up with. If any of you are non-binary or trans and can give me some pointers. The reason I chose these 4 categories is because I feel like when I'm looking at book reviews, when I'm looking at synopses and recommendations for books, people tend to use these terms. Like agender or bigender, I know are some other gender identities, but like I just don't seem to find them as like, it's not easy to find them mentioned as describing a protagonist. People usually just say non-binary. And I'm very sorry if that is the wrong way of looking at it. Please let me know. I can amend this table very easily. I basically just looked for words that I remember popping up when people recommended books that feature non-traditional gendered characters. By traditional, I mean, cis female, cis male. The heteronormative sort of categories. But I know that I've heard a lot of people talk about non-binary protagonists and trans protagonists. So that's kind of why I included these. Again, please let me know if I can improve this aspect to be more inclusive or more accurate. But this is what I came up with my very small cis female brain. Very sorry. And so for this, I decided that the gender of my TBR character would be what the protagonist of my book has to be. I might change this to protagonist or author, depending, and see how it feels. But I feel like people talk more openly about protagonists. Like maybe the author isn't quite sure and isn't comfortable revealing their gender, um, but they are comfortable talking about their non-binary protagonist, for example. That's just kind of how I see it, because it is important to keep that in mind with sexuality and gender, that they can be a very invisible like identity for many people, and some people might not be comfortable sharing that. So that's why I don't try and read authors based on that. I try and look for representation. And if an author claims to be own voices and they're writing a trans character, for example, then that's like awesome, and that definitely like feeds into how I view the book. So yeah, that's my little spiel about gender. But I still felt like it was a cool thing to include, because it'll kind of encourage me to read outside of the cis sphere, if you will, the cisgender sphere. So, okay, so if you want to just get to the TBR game, to get to what I'm going to read this month of February, you can skip to the timestamp, which I'll put on the screen. But otherwise, I'm going to go through and explain why I've chosen certain things. So, for genre, I've taken like a list of genres that I found on like a spreadsheet that is my book tracker that I got from Meg with Books recommended it on her channel. I'll link the spreadsheet down below in case you're interested for whatever reason. But I took out some that I knew I was not interested in, some genres, like what did I take out? Anthologies. I don't feel like I get on with them. If I want to read one, I'm going to do it when I'm in the mood, because I feel like if I'm going to force myself to do it, then that's going to give it less of a chance for me to like it. And I took out poetry because, for the same reasons, like well, it's not that I don't like poetry, it's that I've never been in that sphere, I guess, and I've never really allowed myself to read a lot of poetry, so I'm kind of nervous about that. But again, this might all change. I might add poetry and anthologies as like a challenge later on if I want to really try and make myself read that stuff, but that's for later. So I ended up with graphic novel, romance, paranormal, magical realism, thriller, fantasy, non-historical, non-fiction, dystopian, contemporary horror, and sci-fi. So for Barbarian, I chose graphic novels because they tend to be very action-oriented barbarians. One of their special abilities is the ability to enter a rage, which they lose all sense, and they just focus on killing shit. And I feel like graphic novels are really good at portraying just killing shit or like just action, like there's some things that art just creates like a movement that I feel is better encapsulated in a visual medium rather than a written medium. That's why I gave Barbarian graphic novel. Bard, romance, because they will try and seduce anything that moves, is the typical meme with bards. Cleric, I chose paranormal because I figure they're kind of like the priests of the world, and exorcisms, demons, that sort of vampire paranormal stuff, I feel like clerics would try and stay on top of. They would want to know what is new in the world of paranormal lore. Druids, I gave magical realism because druids tend to be, of course, very tied to nature, but their magic is like, it's not very, their magic is not very ostentatious. It's kind of a natural sort of flair that they have, their magic. And for some reason, like, magical realism just gives me druid energy. I don't know why, because the thing about magical realism, it's like, it's our world, it's an understandable world, but there's like something a little weird about it. Something is different, and to me that just screams druid. Fighters, I give thriller because fighters have the ability to take multiple actions in a single turn, which is unique to them, and that's kind of something that like it makes them iconic. And like that kind of gave me the same impression as like page turning, like a thriller. You're going like do 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 do. It's the same as like a fighter, just anime style, like going from enemy to enemy to enemy in like dispatching 3 of them in the span of 6 seconds. Is like, that is the same sort of feel I get from a thriller. Monk, I gave fantasy. So I debated adding myth as a genre, but I feel like myth isn't really a genre. It's more like maybe a trait that a book has or a subject the book is on. But I feel like monks would be the keepers of myths or histories of things that are not of the human world, for example. And that's why I think they would, enjoy fantasy for what it gives, for the pleasure it gives the mind. And also, fantastical myths would be something that they would take care of. So that's kind of why I gave them that genre. Paladins are known for being very rigidly religious and adhering very strictly to their creed, as I mentioned before. And they're very influenced by history, precedent. It matters very much to them where their faith came from and how it became what it is today. So that's kind of why I figured history might be a very interesting study for them. Nonfiction I give to rangers because rangers tend to be very interested in animals and wildlife, and what better way to learn more about them than read a book about edible mushrooms of the forest or the beasts of the direwood, for example. I feel like they would have a lot of nonfiction writings on their person to just stay on top of their learning. Rogue, I gave dystopians because rogues are sneaky little bastards and they create chaos wherever they go. Not speaking from any prior experience here, of course, but that's kind of why I give them the dystopian genre. Sorcerers are another class which is born with innate magic. They're kind of naturally gifted with magic, and that's why they tend to be a little maybe narcissistic. They tend to be of the noble class, because magic opens a lot of opportunities for you. So I figured that they would be the most likely of all the classes to be, besides Bard, but Bard fits everything, to be like on top of the latest fashions, the latest goings on in the kingdom, and the rumors and all that. And that just said contemporary to me, They would be very privy to the contemporary happenings of their world. Warlocks, what makes them special is that they form a pact with some sort of deity or demon, or bad person as well. And that's where they get their magic from. So I figured horror would be a good thing because I've seen it a lot of times where, sometimes the pact you made involved some sort of promise of a soul or promise of a repayment to this deity or demon that you've got your magic from, and it can be kind of a sketchy deal that they might come to collect one day. And these deities tend to be quite scary things. Maybe they will whisper to you in the dark or talk to you when no one else is around, and that kind of is very horror-y sort of thing for me. That's why I gave Warlock horror. And sci-fi I gave to Wizard because I figure wizards, they get their magic just by studying really hard. And they have access to some of the most powerful magic. They become some of the most powerful casters. And I figure that, that saying that magic is science we don't understand yet. And I feel like wizards have gotten that understanding, and that's why they're able to manipulate it so well. And the things that wizards are able to do would be like something sci-fi that, you might have, like, some of the things they're able to produce with their magic would be way ahead of the technology of the current day. So that's why I decided to give sci-fi to the wizards. Okay, alignment next. So for chaotic, I gave that myth or weird. The reason I put weird in is because to quote like books and Lala, she likes books that are really weird. Like A.S. King, her favorite author, just writes a lot of books with like weird happenings, weird endings, weird magical realism, something like that. And I tend to feel like myth has that weirdness to it as well. Like some Greek myths, some of my myths that I know from my heritage, which is Mexico, tend to have that bit where it's like, that's kind of weird. Like to our modern sensibilities, it's just kind of a weird thing to have happen in a story. and chaos, myth, weird, that blended together in my mind, which is why I gave that book trait. So, for example, if I got chaotic as the role, my book would have to be like based on a myth or have like a weirdness sort of attached to it. Neutral, slice of life, everyday, normal, flat, made sense to me. Lawful, I gave retelling because it had to be faithful to the original story, working within the lines of it perhaps, to make it recognizable, but putting your own spin on it seems like a very lawful thing to do. You're adhering to something that's already existing. Good got to me epic. So by epic I mean the traditional style of writing, which is like the 3-act epic following a usually chosen one hero. And that seems like the ultimate good to me, is like Odysseus. Well, I mean, Odysseus wasn't really a good guy, was he? I guess a good Greek hero goes on an epic adventure, and that's kind of why I chose that. Evil is anything with political stuff in it, politics, because politics is the arena of corruption and greed. And you hear, like, I'm American, you hear people go to Washington as naive, hopeful bunnies, and they find that they are just buried underneath all this bad stuff that they can't get through to get the legislation they want. Like, politics is a lot of room for a lot of bad, evil people. It's where they can go to gain power, and it's where you have to fight them to get things done the right way. So I mean, that's my very biased view of that and why I gave politics to evil. And lastly, the most obvious one is unaligned, so it has to have nature as a character or a theme or an aspect of the book, because you find unaligned things in nature. And lastly is race. So even in D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, humans are seen as the most diverse culturally and appearance-wise of all the races. So that's why I figured, if I got human, then my challenge would be to read diversely, whether that's from an own voices author, or whether that's a protagonist who it represents a minority in orientation or race or identity or whatever. Dwarf is read a short book because dwarves are short. Elf is read a long book because elves live a long time. Halfling is read an audiobook, and I chose it because halflings to me have a rich oral history. They have a very ingrained sense of hospitality, sharing over food, and to me that really gives me a strong impression of oral history keeping. And audiobooks are maintaining the oral tradition that humans have, and that halflings probably would have in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Dragonborn I chose as read a standalone because Dragonborn tend to be very proud, a proud people. And a book is standing alone by itself, needs no series. It can proudly make its own entrance into the world. That's kind of how I looked at it. Gnome, read a new release. Gnomes tend to be very inventive, tinkering people. Some of the best innovation comes from them. So that's why I decided to do a new release, because it's new, it's shiny, it's hopefully full of new ideas. Half-orc, read a book by a country from a my bad. Half-orc is read a book by an author from a different country. So half-orcs are kind of an interesting race because they tend to be caught between worlds. Orcs are seen as savages who just want to kill and maim, and many of the times they do want to kill and maim. Their culture is very violent. They're seen as other, so I figured it would be a good thing to read a book from a different country, because it would give you a different perspective, similarly to the kind of perspective a half-orc would have. And lastly, we have tieflings. Similarly to half-orcs, tieflings are seen as, well, in the lore, they're seen as an abomination of nature. They're seen as to be born of demons and devils, and they are assumed to be evil creatures. That's not true at all. That's just kind of like some sort of prejudices that most races have about tieflings. So I figured reading a banned book, like, this is an abomination of nature, we shouldn't read it, so we shall ban it, is the same way. I could easily imagine the world of D&D containing a like pub where it says no tieflings, or like no half orcs even, and that's why I chose read a banned book as tiefling. So that is the idea of my TBR game explained, and now it's time for some rolling. So these are my beautiful dice that I use for Dungeons and Dragons, and I am going to first roll on the class table to decide on a genre. So what I'm going to do is, if I can find a book that fits all of the prompts, wow, that's amazing. So the least amount of books I'll have to read is 1, if I'm clever enough to find a book that fulfills all the prompts. Otherwise, I can mix and match prompts so that the most books I'll read for the TBR is 4, because there's 4 things I'm rolling on. And the least that I can read is 1. And the reason I don't want to do more than that is because I tend to also mood read, and I have other things planned, so I don't want this TBR to just be all the books I read in the month. 4 is either going to be it's going to be at least half of what I read, but it's more likely going to be like more than half of what I read in the month, depending on how busy I am. But no matter what, I will read the books from this TBR game. So that's how it is. And normally, another like caveat, you don't normally roll on these things when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. You usually decide them yourself. So you decide, I want to be a monk who is an evil monk, male orc, half orc, but there is rules which have been released for how to, like, if you're really stumped and don't know what you want to play, you can just roll. And that's kind of how I got the idea for this, like, being more randomized and luck of the dice, so that I'm kind of forcing myself to read hopefully different things. But all right, here we go. First, we're rolling a 1d12 for our class. No, it's gross. Okay. We got a 3. So if we look at our graphic here, a 3 is a cleric. So I have to read in the paranormal genre. Okay. I will get all the prompts first, and then I will see what I can get. So like, I won't look for the books yet. I will just get the prompts first. So next we have alignment. So let me get my D6. Here it is. All right, let's give it a good roll here. 6, unaligned, nature. So we so far have nature and paranormal. So I'm already thinking maybe a werewolf book, or like a haunted forest kind of book, maybe, if I could find something like that. Forest of 1,000 Lanterns would fit, actually, but I already read that because that has a haunted forest in it. All right, let's do race. So that's a 1d8. Where's my 1d8? Here he is. 1d8. 9. This is a 1d10. That is my bad. Whoops. This, I'm really mathematically challenged. I should have seen like, this has, just on this side, I see 5. So that, whatever. This is my 1d8. So let's see what I get here. Good thing I got the 9, though. Otherwise, I wouldn't have realized. A 1. So that is human. Read diversely. Okay. So I will have to make sure that my book represents a own voices or minority protagonist. And lastly is the gender, which the protagonist of a book must be. So a 1d4, this funny looking little die here. So this, the way you read these ones is you look at the top, what line's on top. So we got 4. So that is a trans protagonist. That is awesome. I have not read a book with a trans protagonist yet. Let's see, hopefully you're okay there. So that was very exciting, actually. So our D&D character is a unaligned trans human cleric. Yay! There is an awesome resource called Science Fiction LGBT. Oh, I linked it to someone, so I should be able to find it. It's basically a database for LGBTQA plus reads. So, for example, if you want to read a book with an asexual character, you can go on this database and you put the filter asexual, and there's a bunch of other filter too, like if you don't want like any sexual violence, or if you want both characters to be alive at the end, because unfortunately it tends to be that if a character is queer, they tend to be killed off for some reason. You know, it's fucking dumb, but it's a resource for people to find more diverse reads. Let's see. Oh, Blanca y Roja by Anna Marie McLemore. I've actually really been thinking about reading some Anna Marie McLemore. It fulfills my read diversely because it is by a Latinx author. And if it has trans representation, then I am all there. Okay. The biggest lie of all is a story you think you already know. The Del Cisne girls have never been just sisters, they're also rivals. Bianca as obedient and graceful as Roja is vicious and manipulative. When two local boys become drawn into the game, okay, I will just read this. They know that because of a generation's old spell, their family is bound to a bevy of swans deep in the woods. They know that one day the swans will pull them into a dangerous game that will leave one of them a girl and trap the other in the body of a swan. But when two local boys become drawn into the game, the swan's spell intertwines with the strange and unpredictable magic lacing the woods. And all four of their fates depend on facing truths that could either destroy or save them. Blanca y Roja is the captivating story of sisters, friendship, love, hatred, and the price we pay to protect our hearts. So on Goodreads, this is classed as fantasy, young adult, magical realism, retellings, LGBT. Wow, so many prompts fulfilled there, but not paranormal. So I'm going to have to find a prompt for a book that fulfills a prompt of paranormal and nature relating. This seems to be related to nature. So I think because we have the woods, we have the swans, I feel like that relates enough to natural sort of things. And then we just need to find a paranormal read. So that's going to be a bit easier to find if I just go to my TBR that I have on here digitally, because I'm a 21st century girl. Ooh. Okay, so there's a book, a series of a graphic novel that I've like seen Rachel Marie from Rachel Marie's book journey read called Monstrous. It's a graphic novel series, and it's about a teenage girl who is struggling to survive the trauma of war and who shares a mysterious psychic link with a monster of tremendous power. That seems very paranormal to me. So honestly, I might just read that. I will look for this if I can. Let's see how much it is. $30. Rachel Marie, I'm doing this for you, girl. I trust you. You seem to know what you're on about, and it's not cyberpunk, steampunk sci-fi with a cutie and psychic shit. It's like, what the fuck? Like some of these reviews. Okay. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm gonna do that one because I want to do a nice beefy one. So I have 2 books then for my TBR for this month, starting out light because I have other things planned this month. Ooh. I have my paranormal book fulfilled by Monstrous. I have a nature trans rep diverse read, which is Blanca y Roja by Anna Marie McLemore. And that is the result of my TBR game. I'll see how this feels. I have a feeling that I might want to introduce a way to like I don't know. I might make a way so that I have to choose a number of books for each thing. So like, for example, I might roll and have to do 2 classes. So what I'm thinking is if I decide I want to read more books in a month, I can design more than one character. So I can just roll multiple times and start building a party, because you play Dungeons and Dragons with more than one person. Like you might have a cleric and a fighter and a wizard in your party. And I could have up to I think traditionally is like 4 characters in a party. So I might do that as a way to read more if I want to, but I feel like this is really good for now because I know I'll finish it and then I'll be able to get all my other stuff done. And I'm really excited because these are some awesome reads and it gives me an excuse to go out and buy them. So yeah, thank you guys so much for staying for me with this very long, lengthy video about my Dungeons and Dragons character creation TBR game. This will be the introduction of it, explaining all the reasons I chose them. If I change anything about my game, I will talk about that in later TBR videos. But for now, when I make the next one for March, for example, I won't include the description of the game. I'll just play the game and talk about some of the books I want to read. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye, guys.